This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, my name is Madison, and I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Nebraska. Ms. Davis, I want to first thank you for talking with me today about accessibility and communication barriers. Before we get started, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work you do?
Yes, sure. It's an honor to be invited, Madison. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Kim Davis, and I am an advocacy specialist for the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Our agency serves the broader population of Nebraskans who are deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing. We do a lot of advocacy around different areas, and like, for example, this vlog that we're going to be doing. I want to introduce our sign language interpreter as well. Her name is Sharon Sinkler, and she is also works at the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing as a program interpreter, program coordinator. And so we have, let's see, three employees who are deaf that rely on Sharon's services. And so it's nice to have a staff interpreter. That's a great benefit to us.
Well, great. Welcome to you both. So my first question is, National American Sign Language Day is April 15th. How does sign language compare to other spoken languages?
Spoken language is, of course, auditory, verbal, whereas sign language is a visual language, visual communication, but it's the same concept. We receive audio through our eyes, whereas, and the spoken is done through hands. So it's kind of the same concept.
And are there different types of sign languages?
There is. Here in Nebraska, or I'm sorry, the United States, we use American Sign Language. And it's been around for over 200 years. It has its own syntax, grammar, concepts, things like that. It has its own structure. It's not the same as English. It's not English order. However, there's concepts that are integrated into the language to provide English information in a different way. And then there's other modes of sign language, typically here in Nebraska, that are used. And that is what is called Pidgin signed English and then signing exact English. Those two typically are used in schools, school systems, K through 12, typically is where you'll see that. And they think it's for a purpose of helping to learn English grammar. That's been around since about the 1970s, when they started allowing kids who are deaf to enter their neighboring public schools, what they call a mainstream education. And they said it was, the purpose was to help with English grammar. Whether it's successful or not, the jury's still out. So let's see, how can I explain it best? I'm trying to think of how I want to explain it. But most of the students who use those, it depends on what they have in their individual education program, their IEP. If the parents want that, then the interpreter has to have the competency to sign in their preferred mode, whether that's ASL, PSE, or C. ASL is very expressive, has a lot of facial grammar, less mouth movements where you're actually mouthing the words word for word. It doesn't do that. PSE and C use a lot less facial expression and more of the mouth movements. So it's more, like I said, in an English order. C is very English. They add the endings of words like the ings, the eds to emphasize that. But again, less facial expression. Again, the jury's out whether or not it's a success in what it was intended to do. But again, it's individualized. If that works for somebody, great. If not, then they have to, do modifications to find out what's effective for them.
Great, thank you. And is there certain etiquette someone should follow when speaking to someone who's using an interpreter?
Yes, there is. One of the most important thing is when you have a sign language interpreter with you, don't look at the interpreter. Don't say, tell her, tell him. Just talk directly to the person that you're talking to. It's a communication between us. The interpreter is just there to facilitate and bridge that communication barrier. They're there to break down that barrier and make sure that our conversation is effective. I'm a person, I'm just like you, and like I said, the interpreter is just there to facilitate the communication.
Okay. And what are some other type of communication methods that people from the deaf and hard of hearing community use?
Methods, what kind, like what are you looking for exactly?
Do some individuals prefer to use other modes? Do they prefer to use writing or lip reading or closed captioning? Things like that.
Yes, yes. Like I said, everyone is diverse in their preference of communication. You could meet a person who is deaf that can't hear anything at all, but has the ability to speak or lip read very well. For one-on-one situations, those are great, but with a group situation, that might be a challenge to lip read. So you may want to consider a different mode that will be effective for them, whether that's a captioning service, whether they want to use a sign language interpreter, and that's if the person knows sign language. They may be what we call an oral deaf, ORAL, which is typically someone who relies on whatever hearing they have and speech reading. But someone who signs will probably prefer to have a sign language interpreter. Captioning, depends on the person's literacy skills. And sometimes the speed of the captions can be a challenge. How fast can you read? And how many of the, sometimes if you look at the news on TV, sometimes you will see captionings that is only 2 or 3 words on a line, and it scrolls very fast, and that's difficult to read. So if it's a longer sentence with a slower scrolling speed, like maybe 7 words on a line to make it more easier to read. For a hard of hearing person, they may rely on whatever residual hearing they have. Sometimes they'll use an assistive technology device. If it's a larger system for a larger room, or whether it's a personal listening device for one-on-ones or small groups. A lot of hard of hearing people who are losing their hearing when they're watching the news, a lot of them have a challenge with reading the captions because they've been used to getting all of their information auditorily. And so they have to think of a new way of getting information. So that's where you think of the speed of captioning. But again, whether you're have the ability to hear, or if you're deaf, even reading a book, sometimes it's an individual thing. Not everyone is the same. Captioning doesn't show, emotion. There's no tone, where a sign language interpreter does. If you watch any of the governor's news conferences in our state, or even the city mayor, where they've brought in sign language interpreters, you can see where they use facial expression to convey emphasis and importance of the message or what's happening with COVID and our pandemic, what's going on. And so that information in first language is very important for people who live in the state of Nebraska.
Thank you. And I want to get more into talking about the press briefings and communication in government programming. But before we get to that, could you talk about some of the misconceptions around communicating with individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing?
I think, again, it depends on what kind of exposure the person themselves has had and any experiences. For example, someone who meets a deaf person, maybe they had a bad experience and then they think everyone is just like that person. Well, that's not true. An employer, wants to hire someone and thinks, oh, this hasn't worked out with this deaf person. So then from that point forward, they won't hire another person who's deaf because they think, oh, I had this communication challenge. Well, the challenge could have come from the employer and their attitude versus the deaf person. So those are some misconceptions and things to consider. Some people think if you use sign language, you can't speak. Or if you've become deaf, you're born deaf, oh, you better not teach them sign language because they will never learn how to speak. Well, that's not true. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there, really. Another one is every once in a while, I'll meet with a group of people, and typically in a rural area or someone who is elderly, they will still use, oh, yeah, I know someone who is deaf and dumb. And I just, think, oh, or they use deaf mute. Well, if you look up mute in the dictionary, it says the person doesn't have a capability to use their voice. People who are deaf can. They may not be fluent in their speech. Some of them are, but they have the ability to scream. They have a voice. They make noise. And I mean, I readily admit, they may not be able to speak fluently, but they can sure say those cuss words perfectly clear.
And what are some ways that people from the hearing community can better educate themselves on issues surrounding people who are deaf or hard of hearing?
I think it's best just to interact. Bring a person who's deaf and have them in, a part of your event. If you're not sure if you should bring in a sign language interpreter or caption services, let the person determine that. To have them tell you, I need a sign language interpreter or I need a captionist. So then you can decide whether or not you want to, you know, include an interpreter or a captionist at the event. Attend some deaf events. If you're leery and you think, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to communicate with them, take some sign language classes. Sometimes our agency will provide some basic conversational classes. I just started that with the pandemic. I've had great turnout, and some of them have decided they want to continue on and start taking classes, some non-credit courses, and through their local community college or, some place like a church sometimes will offer a sign language interpreter. Maybe they'll teach classes, but there's also mentoring, finding a deaf person to mentor you. There are lots of ways. There's so much information on the internet as well. The internet is our best friend, right? And so there's lots of ways to find out information about sign language or, you know, contact us. We have lots of resources. We have a media lending library that you can borrow materials for free. Lots of things on sign language, deaf culture, just a variety of materials.
Great, thank you. And as we just mentioned, there are now sign language interpreters at Governor Ricketts' COVID-19 briefings and at the White House press briefings. What does this kind of accessibility mean for individuals?
Oh, it is amazing. Historically, this is such an inspiration to us. We feel like finally we are a part of the community, a big part of the community. And we get firsthand information without those misunderstandings, because sometimes the captioning has mistakes or errors, and understanding the English, the speed of the captions, lots of information can be missed. Having a sign language interpreter is amazing because, again, the information is given to us in our first language, and it's inspirational to be a part of the community.
Is it still important to have closed captioning even when there is an ASL interpreter?
Yes, because again, not everyone knows sign language. Like I said, there are some who identify as oral deaf, some who are hard of hearing, some who have even low vision, deaf blind. Sometimes the transcript from the briefing gives an opportunity to the person who is deaf blind, who maybe can't see the captioning or the interpreter on their screen. So the transcript helps them as well, because then it can be modified to their Braille equipment or use a screen magnifier to enlarge the screen so that they're able to see. So again, a diversity of communication, a diversity of individuals, diversity of identifications, how they identify as deaf, deaf blind. Am I a late deafened adult? Am I hard of hearing? Deaf plus, we call that. So there's lots of identity groups, but in general, we say deaf, deaf blind, and hard of hearing.
Okay. And is there still a gap in access to these kind of government programs and government information?
One big challenge is the availability of interpreters sometimes. Often it's a last minute plan, and so then to get a sign language interpreter or a captionist can be difficult. So it's important to plan ahead. And sometimes I have called, I want to make an appointment, and my appointment is maybe 3 weeks later. They should immediately start the plan to find an interpreter for me as soon as I've made that appointment. The agency or the business is responsible for that. If they wait 1 or 2 days before the appointment when they had 3 weeks to plan, they're not probably going to be successful in getting the accommodation that I need. Another big challenge is the cost, because typically, when you buy equipment, it's a one-time cost, where a sign language interpreter or a caption service provider is an unpredictable cost. And so that's where many businesses or agencies have to set aside and make a budget for that cost. One of the biggest things is that, but by federal guidelines, if there's an undue financial administrative hardship, you can look at that, but you have to consider your overall operating costs of the entire business. So whatever their operating costs are compared to how much it costs to pay for a sign language interpreter or a captions service provider is very nominal. So many of the businesses who are not under government agencies, they can actually get a tax credit for those expenses. State, local government, they can't, but they still have that legal obligation under our state laws to provide sign language interpreters, because it's in our state law. It is mandated.
Right. And you touched on this a little bit already, but what are some other ways we can improve accessibility in these types of programs?
Well, keep a current list of the licensed sign language interpreters. If you have contracted interpreters that you use, keep it current. Make sure you're updating it, say every 6 months or annually, whatever your agreement might be. Caption service providers as well. You can go to the Nebraska Commission to the Hard of Hearing. We have a website, a way to find sign language interpreters. Those who are licensed and are willing to share their contact information are listed there, so then you can contact them directly. You can also use the interpreter referral agencies that are listed on our website, and those are agencies who will look and find available licensed interpreters for you here in the state of Nebraska. There's also then a third option, and that's video remote interpreting, and that's electronically through a video platform. And we have licensed providers there. So there are 3 options that you can go to our website and find. Service providers, we also have a list of them. Yeah, so if you need any of that, just contact our agency and just, keep it updated every once in a while. We also have a list of vendors who sell technology, and we have that information as well. And that's for assisted listening systems or personal assisted listening devices. If they need a public phone, where can I get a public phone for people who need a special telephone for public use or for their employees or residents of a facility? Anyone who's overseeing that under the Olmstead Act. So there's lots of things. And like I said, we have tons of resources. We are your go-to.
Well, that's great. We can link to the website below this vlog, so hopefully people can check it out there. I also want to ask you, do you have any personal or work experiences you can share surrounding issues with communication barriers?
There are lots. When like I said, we have people who are deafblind, hard of hearing, who reach out to us because they are having issues. And we also have employers, service providers who also reach out to us because we're almost like that mediator between the two. So we advocate for both. One of the biggest things is with using the video platforms instead of in-person meetings because of COVID and social distancing. Video platforms, they haven't considered involving a sign language interpreter in these or putting captioning on them. It depends on what type of platform you're using. Some of the platforms are not very user-friendly. And so we had to find out which one, like Zoom, GoToMeeting, Google Meet. Another one is WebEx. And so, we've had challenges, and that's for visual communication access for people who are deaf who rely on a sign language interpreter. And then for captioning. So now more and more of the video platforms actually are enhancing their accessibility, trying to make them so that they have some voice recognition captioning that auto generates the captioning, or that you can hire an interpreter and then have access to captioning. So everything is on the same screen rather than being separate. That I think has been the biggest enhancement, or even a communication barrier we faced before the enhancements. So just access to communication. And then access to communication at people's place of work, and because of the employer's concern for the cost of hiring interpreters or accommodations. So a lot of times it's not the admin, it's basically the people at the bottom that say, oh no, we can't provide this. But really that agency or organization or that employer, they do have that accountability to provide that effective communication, and they don't realize it. And so a lot of times upper administrative teams, they need to provide training periodically to the people who are the feet on the street, so to speak, to try to give them the knowledge to empower them to realize that they do need to provide those accommodations. um, Policies, procedures, education, training, and that's a lot of times where we come in.
Okay, well, wonderful. Is there anything that I didn't ask today that you think might be important to share?
Well, I just hope people keep an open mind with communication. If you're unsure how to communicate, go ahead and start a written communication with us. Try to gesture, and you want to be a part of our community and our lives, and you want us to be a part of yours, your community and your lives. you know just keep that open mind, that open two-way street of communication. One of my favorite quotes is by Helen Keller, and she says, blind separates us from things, deafness separates us from people. But I actually don't believe that now, because I understand back in her time, during her time, she was born in the 1890s, late 1890s, 1900s. So close to that time frame. So of course we didn't have technology at that time. And now we have so much available to us. We have access to everything through the internet, in person with sign language interpreters, caption service providers. Just we have so much. And so that has opened up that communication. And it really all points to attitudes. Attitudes. It's important that we change our attitudes with each other. Interact with each other in whatever way that might be. So just, do it. We don't bite.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for speaking with me today. We'll link to the website in this blog. And that's all for now. So I just want to thank you again for being here. And it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.